Today I'm getting back to my medium format film roots and shooting two brand new black and white films, Kentmere 100 and Kentmere 400. Hey there, and happy Medium Format Monday. I'm your host, Matt Marrash. Mondays here on the channel, we're gonna be talking about films that are larger than 35, but smaller than 4x5. If you've never shot medium format film before, this is a roll film format that's larger than 35 millimeter. It comes on these little 6 centimeter or 60 millimeter tall plastic spools, and it fits in cameras that even predate 35 millimeter. It's a pretty robust film format. The film is backed with a paper like this called backing paper that allows these numbers on the back to show you what frame you're on in much older cameras that have a little guide window. In medium format, there's a ton of different creative choices you have, and those are based on whatever camera you choose. There's square format cameras, there are 645, smaller rectangle cameras, and larger rectangle cameras, 6x7, 6x9, but there's room for some personality in going handheld or on the tripod or getting really creative, so it's a really neat choice. Now that we're all on the same page about what medium format is, let's talk about these brand new films. So the first one from Ilford is Kentmere 100. This is a medium speed black and white panchromatic film. A medium speed film is anything that is between ISO 50 and ISO 200. This is rated ISO 100 for your best results. And panchromatic meaning it sees everything the human eye sees, but it reproduces it as a grayscale value instead of color. And a bit of a speed step up from that, we have Kentmere Pan 400, which is a high-speed panchromatic black and white film. Two things you'll notice differently about the Kentmere Pan 400, you get 2 more f-stops of sensitivity to work with, and this film is supposed to be a little bit flatter and easier to do push and pull with. This isn't necessarily a film that's meant to compete with some of the more professional options out there, like the more T-grained or Delta films from Ilford's lineup, nor their HP5 or FP4 Plus series films. Those are a little more expensive. They have a little bit more professional capabilities in terms of how much contrast they can handle and how much extra abuse they can take in the darkroom. After a little back and forth with Ilford, I got my package in the mail and I was floored to see that they didn't just send me 1 roll of each, they sent me 3 rolls of each. With the help of my trusty Hasselblad 500C and a lot of my film photography contacts here in town, we got those 6 rolls exposed and I want to share them with you. And even though there were 6 different rolls of film handled by different photographers, the processing was handled entirely the same. They were all developed in Kodak HC-110 Dilution B at 20 degrees Celsius and the published times for 100 versus 400. I've been long overdue to shoot with the Hasselblad 500C, and my buddies Kevin and Charlize coming to visit from the West Coast was the perfect excuse. They're also film photographers. Kevin came with his Hasselblad and a few other cameras. Charlize came with some Leicas and her awesome Rolleiflex medium format camera. And we had a bit of a medium format meetup. It was pretty cool. Even though I was constantly struggling the mirror slap of this camera when indoors, typically you don't want to go below about a 60th of a second on this camera. I think the lowest one I did was a 15th of a second. A little fluttery, but didn't turn out too bad. Even though I'd been warned that the Kentmere 400 was a little bit flatter, I like to have a flatter look to it so then I can bring it into Lightroom, Capture One, Photoshop, whatever I'm feeling, and make my adjustments from there. Boost my contrast, do a little dodge and burn, and get it in the ballpark. And I feel like the look of this film reminded me a lot of when I used to play around with Tri-X and HP5 and started pushing those films. So kind of the base look of this Kentmere, in my opinion, was close to HP5, shot at or underexposed at 800 and then developed a little bit longer. I felt like this film didn't handle as well in like the really overblown highlights department. On the scanning side, those highlights were really blocked up and really bunched up, but I found I was able to bring them back later in the darkroom. After playing around with how this film handled in ambient light, I called up my good buddy Mr. Tariq Terry so he could arrange for a shoot where we could really put that Kentmere 400 to the test. For a lot of the portraiture that Tariq does, especially in the studio, he loves using the Mamiya RZ 67. So we loaded that up with a roll of Kentmere 400 and we set up a pretty contrasty lighting setup. We had more than a few f-stops of range from the brightest highlight on our model Wambui's face all the way down to the shadow on kind of the short side of her face. We did have a relatively bright backlight on Wambui, and that was giving us this pretty extreme contrast. For a few of the shots, we had her turn away from the camera, giving her what's called a broad lighting pattern, and even the part of her face that fell off into shadow still held onto that detail, but here's where we can really start to see that grain in the portraits. Tariq and I went back and forth on different looks and different lenses. We started relatively long with the RZ and the 110 f2.8, and later on when I took over, I wanted to try my hand at some more wide angle stuff. So I threw one of the wide lenses on the RZ. We got up close. We diffused the overhead light a little bit more, but overall the Kentmere handled decently well. Even though we were pushing the dynamic range of that film a little bit, slightly overexposed areas were fine, and surprisingly areas that were underexposed by 2 or even 3 stops still handled that detail, but you are starting to get grain, so be careful if you are doing really extreme contrast ratios. After 2 successful shoots on Kentmere 400, it was time to try out the 100 speed variant. To my surprise, Tariq had arranged for yet another shoot. We wanted to try changing up the contrast yet again. This time we lit our model Melrose with 2 large strip boxes relatively close from each other. This is sometimes called like hero lighting, where you kind of sandwich it in from the sides and then kind of let the background go really, really white by putting 2 lights of equivalent power into some V-flats and then through that into the background. This really helped keep focus on our subject, that awesome hair, and then all the personality and expressions we were getting. We had the RZ out again up on the studio stand, and we were focusing really, really close to Melrose, framing up her face and hair really nice and tight, and really just focusing on those expressions. And when the good expressions started coming, that trigger finger of Tariq's was just rolling through shots. The first 8 shots out of 10 on that 6x7 camera were gone in about 60 seconds. The main tool that black and white film uses to communicate look is contrast. What's the difference between the bright highlight areas and the dark shadow areas? And when you bring a key light, especially like a big softbox or any light source really close to your subject, it's gonna be way brighter in one area. It's gonna emphasize that contrast. So whether it's a harsh or a soft source, if you get brighter to that softbox, see like this one here, it's gonna get brighter and it's gonna emphasize the difference between the bright area and the dark area. And that's exactly what we did with this shoot with Melrose. So far, we'd shot 3 rolls of film across 2 different cameras, a 6x6 Hasselblad, a 6x7 Mamiya RZ. It was time to change up even a little bit more. So I called up my good buddy, Mr. Steven Takis, and he had been bugging me for a while to come out with him on a shoot so we could do some shooting with Holgas. The Holga is a plastic, fantastic 6x6 square format camera where generally the center of the lens is tack sharp and then it kind of fades off into this high vignette, soft plasticky look. Now, unfortunately, I was a little busy on the darkroom printing side of things to head out with him, but I still handed him a roll of Kentmere 400 so he could head out with his Holga. Holgas definitely benefit from using a higher speed film in them, and that relatively soft look of the Kentmere 400 paired with the plastic lens of the Holga matched together really, really well. Steven did some shots in some more subdued light as well as really high contrast direct light. One thing I really like about showing a variety of different results with different cameras is that you guys are going to be using different cameras. So I love being able to show this is what it looks like through a toy camera. This is what it looks like through a high-end professional tool when you're using lighting and everything in between. That was kind of the whole goal of testing this out. Nothing like super scientific, but just enough to give you a taste of what this film can do and maybe see yourself using it. For the final test shoot with my remaining Kentmere film, I called up local photographer Persephone Mitchell. She runs the black and white darkroom now over at Midwest Photo, my old job there. She's a fantastic photographer and she really knows her way around black and white film, doing tons and tons of developing. She's in there 2-3 days a week and even making great contact prints and enlargements for customers. She'd expressed interest in working with this new medium format film, as well as getting to test out the Contax 645, something she's been looking at for years. So we went to the rentals counter at Midwest Photo, grabbed the Contax, grabbed some film, and we arranged for a quick studio shoot in, you guessed it, my buddy Tariq's studio. This time we had model Hannah with us and we wanted to do yet another different lighting setup. So we weren't using small soft boxes or a hard light source. We went for the biggest, baddest, softest light source we could. So we got the big crane out and a giant 7-foot softbox that we added extra diffusion on, and we ran a big powerful 1600 watt light through there, and we needed every ounce of that light because we were shooting some Kentmere 100. Pairing that up with the Contax 645, that camera gives us 16 shots, so a little bit more mileage than maybe a 12-shot square format or a 10-shot 6x7. There were larger plans to do a head-to-head shoot between Kentmere 100 and FP4 Plus, but I was having terrible sync cable issues. I didn't have just one, but I had two PC sync cables fail on me when I was trying to hook it up to a Hasselblad I was going to be shooting with the FP4 versus the Contax that Persephone was shooting. So we ended up just passing the camera back and forth. When you're shooting 645, you actually get 16 shots on a roll of film, which is pretty solid. But we did get some great looks with model Hannah. She was super patient while we switched the cameras back and forth and changed up the lighting, brought in V-flats, all sorts of stuff to modify how the contrast and look of the light was. I also wanted to give this film a chance at something that Ilford hinted that this film really is for. I wanted to see how this film handled in the black and white darkroom. I'm so glad I took the time to go to Midwest Photo, rent out some darkroom time, and make some contact sheets and enlargements, because that's where I really feel this film comes into its own, when you're actually printing with it. There are a lot of modern professional films like your Deltas, your HP5, that sort of thing, which are really good at a hybrid workflow, whether you're scanning or printing. But I found where the Kentmere really does well is when you're doing traditional process, when you're laying those negatives down on the paper, shining some light through it, and getting some contact sheets. I was able to make contact sheets from 3 of the rolls of film. The first one that I did with my Hasselblad and the Kentmere 400. The shoot that Tariq and I did with Wambui on the Kentmere 400, and the studio shoot that Tariq and I did with Melro and the Kentmere 100. All of these negatives had lots of good information on there that made it pretty easy to print, and I was really surprised by how different the contrast was when I was doing traditional printing versus scanning. The scans were really, really flat, and I had to do a ton of work to get them where I wanted them to be. Under the enlarger, they printed very, very reasonably, anywhere from grades 2 to 4. Most negatives printing between grade 2.5 and 3, which is right in the middle of the road. There were some negatives that needed a little more TLC and some extra dodge and burn. Dodge where you're hiding the light from hitting the paper, or burn where you're giving it more exposure in those areas. By the way, if you want to get in the darkroom, Wednesdays here on the channel we have DIY Darkroom. Get subscribed. Overall, Kentmere 100 and 400 are excellent medium format options for somebody that's looking to get into the format and not go broke, or someone that's experienced and just needs a lot of film to shoot. A professional can still make professional work on this, and somebody that's learning the tricks of the trade, learning darkroom processes, this is another excellent offering. It can seem like an uphill battle trying to get into film photography now because the expense of the cameras is somewhat up and the films are way up. So having a film manufacturer commit to releasing more films, and some at a budget tiered price, it's an excellent option for someone looking to get into it. At the time of recording, this is one of the most inexpensive black and white panchromatic films. In North America, this is selling for just shy of $6 US. And if you head over to my buddies over at the Film Photography store, they have a special launch price going through the end of the year for only $5. So pass the savings along and get a few more rolls of film. So what's the first thing you're going to shoot on the new Kentmere 100 and 400 in medium format? Let me know down below in the comments, and also mention what camera you're going to use to do it. I think that's where we have the most room for expression and personality, is the different cameras and aspect ratios. For those longer form questions about medium format, you can hit me up. mediumformatquestions@gmail.com. I want to thank you again for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time for more Medium Format Monday.